Okay, let's jump right into a seismic shift in global history. We are talking about the year 1960.
hmm A year so pivotal, it's just known as the Year of Africa.
And it's not just some abstract title, is it?
No, not at all. It was an immediate, massive geopolitical overhaul. I mean, the hard fact is that 17 different African nations gained full independence from European powers that year.
17.
17. Mostly French colonies, but also huge changes involving the British and Belgians.
That scale is just... It's hard to wrap your head around. Millions of people basically overnight went from being subjects of an empire to citizens of their own new country.
Exactly. It's one of those defining moments of the whole 20th century. It's just this moment of immense hope, you know, a future built by Africans, for Africans.
So the big question is why 1960? It feels less like a slow trickle and more like a dam bursting.
Yeah.
What forces came together right then?
You really have to look backwards a little bit, straight into World War II. That was the crucible.
And there's a huge irony there, right? You have thousands of African soldiers fighting for European freedom, fighting against tyranny.
They fought all over the world, came home as victors, and then they asked a very simple, very powerful question.
Why aren't we free?
Exactly. And the colonial powers had no good answer. Plus, these soldiers came back with new skills, technical skills, leadership experience. They became the core of the new nationalist movements.
And on the other side of that, the war left France and Britain just financially shattered.
Precisely. We talk about the politics, but you have to look at the money. It was just becoming too expensive to maintain these massive empires thousands of miles away. It was, unsustainable.
At the same time, this new global body is coming into its own, the United Nations.
The UN was a game changer, psychologically and legally. It started pushing this principle of self-determination.
Which, in simple terms, just means a people's right to choose their own government, right?
That's it. And it became this powerful moral weapon. It gave these emerging leaders a global stage to make their case and made it much harder for colonial powers to justify their existence.
So you've got pressure from the outside, but the real engine was on the ground, this new generation of African leaders.
Oh, absolutely. These were highly educated, politically savvy people. Many of them had studied in Europe or the U.S. They saw democracy in action and wanted to bring it home.
We're talking about giants here, like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana.
Right, who kind of set the stage a few years earlier.
Yeah.
And people like Leopold Sédar Senghor in Senegal. Senghor was a poet, an intellectual.
And they were skilled negotiators.
Incredibly skilled. They faced prison, they faced exile, but they knew how to build mass movements and, crucially, how to negotiate a peaceful transfer of power. That was the key.
Okay, so let's get into the moments of freedom themselves. Because with so many countries and different colonial rulers, it wasn't a single story. You can really see three different paths emerge in 1960.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. How the transition happened really depended on who was in charge and how much they wanted to hang on.
So path one would be that huge block of French West Africa. We're talking about Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast.
The homie, yeah, whole group of them. And these transitions were, for the most part, done through political agreements, not violent wars.
And why was that? Did France just give up?
They realized the fight was over, but they didn't want to just, walk away. They created something called the French Community.
Which sounds nice, but...
It was freedom with a lot of strings attached. The idea was to keep these new nations tightly linked to France, especially economically.
how did that work in practice?
The big one was currency. Many of them were locked into the CFA franc, which was tied to the French currency. So Paris still had huge control over their economies. New flags were flying in Dakar and Abidjan, but the economic power, a lot of that stayed in France.
Wow. Okay, that's a crucial detail. Now, path two, Nigeria. It gets its independence from Britain on October 1st, 1960. And this was a huge global event.
Oh, it was the biggest. Nigeria was and is the most populous country in Africa. Its freedom sent a massive signal.
But its path was much more complicated internally.
Very complicated. The British had governed Nigeria as three separate regions, sort of pitting the different ethnic groups against each other.
So the challenge wasn't just getting the British to leave, it was getting the different Nigerian groups to agree to form one country.
Exactly. It took years of tough negotiations between Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa Fulani leaders to agree on a single constitution. The fact that they pulled it off peacefully was seen as this huge victory for African unity.
Which brings us to the third path, and it's It's a really tragic contrast, the Belgian Congo.
Yeah, the Congo is the ultimate warning story. It shows what happens when independence is granted without any preparation at all.
The Belgian rule was famously brutal, right? Just about extracting resources.
It was almost no investment in education or governance. So when they suddenly granted independence in June 1960, they basically just left. There was no infrastructure of power to hand over.
Wait, and the result was
Immediate chaos. I mean, within weeks, the army mutinied, the country collapsed into civil war. There are almost no trained Congolese doctors, lawyers, or officers to run the state.
and outside powers immediately got involved, didn't they?
Absolutely. The fight became about control of the Congo's immense mineral wealth, especially in the province of Katanga.
Right.
Western companies and Cold War players all backed different sides. The United Nations had to send in this massive peacekeeping force just to stop the country from completely breaking apart. It was a tragedy.
So looking at the bigger picture, all 17 of these new nations joined the global community. What does that do to an institution like the UN?
It completely transforms it. Overnight, the balance of power in the General Assembly shifts. Suddenly, you have this huge African bloc.
And they can vote together?
They could vote together, and their voice can't be ignored anymore. They could finally start to drive the agenda on issues like fair trade, human rights, and decolonization for the rest of the continent. It was the moment the Global South really got a seat at the table.
But back home, political freedom didn't magically solve all the problems.
Not at all. The celebration was real, but so were the challenges. They inherited economies that were, by design, set up only to benefit Europe.
You mean exporting raw materials, like cocoa, coffee, that kind of thing?
Exactly. They were built to ship raw materials out, not to support their own people. There were no local industries, hardly any roads connecting their own cities.
So the first job for every new government was just building a country from scratch.
From the ground up, roads, hospitals, schools. And that took a lot of money, which meant many of them remained economically tied to their old colonial rulers for aid and loans. It was a really difficult position to be in.
On a more positive note, though, this period saw this incredible explosion of culture.
Yes. This wasn't just political freedom, it was a cultural rebirth. For decades, colonial education had told Africans their culture was inferior. Independence was a chance to reclaim it.
So you have writers and artists finally telling their own stories.
You do. Think of writers like Chinua Achebe in Nigeria. His novels challenged the European version of history. In music, you had styles like highlife taking off, blending traditional rhythms with modern instruments. It was the soundtrack of liberation.
And this was a very deliberate project, wasn't it? Building a new identity.
For sure, new national museums were built to preserve local history, not colonial history. And sports became this huge source of national pride, a way to compete and win on the world stage.
Now, we have to remember, as amazing as 1960 was, the job wasn't finished. Not all of Africa was free.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Southern Africa was still locked in really brutal struggles. Portugal held on to Angola and Mozambique for another 15 years. And then you had the white minority regimes in South Africa and Rhodesia.
But the success of the Year of Africa must have given them hope.
Oh, it was a massive spark. It proved that independence wasn't some impossible dream. It showed the world that colonialism was on its way out, and it fueled the fight for freedom across the rest of the continent for decades to come.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, education. You said it was a top priority for all these new governments.
It was non-negotiable. The new leaders knew that real independence required an educated population. You can't run a country without doctors, engineers, and teachers.
So they just started building schools everywhere.
Thousands of them, especially in rural areas that had been completely ignored. They launched huge campaigns to train teachers. Education was seen as the single most important investment in the future.
So if you were, say, a 13-year-old student in 1960 in one of these new nations,
Your life completely changed. You were part of the first generation to grow up with the real possibility of becoming whatever you wanted to be. That ceiling that colonialism had put in place was suddenly gone. It was a generation filled with incredible promise.
the Year of Africa, at the end of the day, really stands as this monument to the universal desire for freedom. It laid the foundation for the continent of over 50 countries we see today.
Absolutely. And its legacy, it reminds us that true sovereignty isn't just about having a flag. It's about controlling your own economy, your own resources.
Yeah.
And that's a question that many nations around the world are still grappling with today.
See you next time.